A number of people who would like to ask questions. I have one more before I'll open it up to questions to the audience. Roger, you had indicated that the out-of-wedlock birth rate feeds the disparities that we see between the various races.
Right.
Professor Patterson, I think much of what Moynihan was referring to in terms of the retarding effects of out-of-wedlock births on the black community. Well, going back to something you said, the out-of-wedlock birth rate for whites today is almost identical to that of blacks when the Moynihan report was issued. Why is there not a similar retarding of the advancement of whites today as there would have been or there was of blacks back in the 1960s?
Well, I think actually Kate Heimowitz, who I think is going to be on one of the future panels today, could talk about that better than I can, but the point that she makes is that the problems do face white kids that are born out of wedlock. You have this sort of disparities between classes now as opposed to between races, and you have white parts of society that are caught up in the same tangle of pathologies now that African American families were caught up in the 1960s. Now, because whites are the overwhelming majority of the population, you don't see, those disparities may not be as obvious. But if you look at, you control for race, but you look to see if there is a connection between children of whatever color and growing up in a home without a father and poverty, getting in trouble at school, dropping out of school, not doing well in school, substance abuse, you name the pathology, there is going to be that connection between growing up in a home without a father and not doing well in life, particularly for little boys.
I'll just add, education is a big issue here. It's been estimated that only around 3 to 5% of college-educated white women have children out of wedlock. Percentage is higher among similarly educated black women, but not nearly as high as it is for ill-educated children. I mean, children from parents who are ill-educated. So it is a class issue. And education, of course, is one marker for class.
Okay, Professor Herman Belt's asking this question and put a little bit of gloss on it. Actually, the references to group identity and cultural group identity are almost impossible to avoid. They've been relied on throughout history. It seems very natural when there's disparities to go by group identity. Professor Brooks points to things like human capital assets, resource assets. It would be social scientifically possible to provide exact measurement of these things. Every 3 years you get regraded as to what your human assets are, but that is going to lead to a totalitarian reckoning and redistribution. That is never going to work. The unfortunate truth is, although it's a blessing really, I would say, that individual rights and responsibility are the only practical way to organize human life, and that starts with the family. That's very fundamental in the family, and it radiates out from there. Actually, I'm encouraged by what Professor Patterson says, what Roger Clegg says, and what Professor Brooks says, because I think it's been it's a fruitful discussion. And as Roger says in one of his articles, we have never, all through this affirmative action period, given up the idea of individual rights and responsibility, and we are mighty glad of that, and thanks for the opportunity for a few questions. I appreciate it.
Let's limit it to questions. We only have a limited amount of time, so the briefer the question, the better for the panelists, okay? Ma'am?
You would say that just as you get to me. Hi, my name is Michelle Johnson, and I'm representing the State Advisory Commission from Kansas. And I'm a former employment attorney and a former journalist and author of 3 books. And I was born out of wedlock in 1964. So, you know, one of my issues is just the use of the word pathology with fatherless families. And I think that we judge a group not just by how we treat the least of them in the group, but also how we treat the people who are doing the so-called right things, which gets back to what Professor Brooks was saying. So rather than just focusing on programs that deal with the disparity, which of course is important and is always going to happen, is there any ideas you have for dealing with the fact that there are people who have MBAs, law degrees, MDs, graduate degrees, people who are doing all the right things, who are Black, who are Hispanic, and yet they're still having the same pathology in terms of the outcome? Because my first book was Working While Black, and let me tell you, there's nothing more heartbreaking than to have people write me or email me and call me who've done all the right things, and they're still treated with that same sense of disparity in terms of their outcomes. Do you have any suggestions for that?
No, I think that you make a good point, because again, one of the things that bothers me is when you have African Americans doing everything that we're supposed to do culturally, yet the outcomes are what you call pathological. I don't know, I wouldn't use that word to describe that, but I understand what you're saying. And I'd like to know, like, from people like Roger, how do you explain that? I mean, what do you tell an African-American male who graduates from college, and this is not just for 1 year or 5 years or 10 or 20 or 30, it's for 40 years. And the disparities have gotten greater. What do you tell them? I mean, you certainly don't tell them, well, to quit. That's, I mean, that's not what you tell them. That's not the message, to give up. But well, let me ask it this way. Do you consider that to be in any way problematic, the fact that there is this racial disparity, this income disparity between college-educated Black men and white men?
Well, sure. I mean, you know, if the disparity is a result of racial discrimination, then of course it's a problem. And I've made it very clear that I'm not saying that racial discrimination does not exist. It still does exist. And I'm all for, you know, bringing lawsuits against employers who discriminate on the basis of race. I'm all for, I think it's a great thing that our popular culture vilifies racists. You know, if you're a screenwriter and you want to communicate to the audience that they're not supposed to like a character, you have them say something bigoted. I would want, you know, with all respect, to take a look at those figures. I mean, for instance, you know, are you controlling for what,
yes,
you know, the individuals major in? You know, the people who major in one thing make less money than people who major in engineering or something like that. And you know, all the other you know, variables that are there. I mean, we see all the time this disparity pointed to in the male-female context, and it's almost always bogus.
Yeah.
So I would want to, you know, look at those figures, but I'm not saying that it's all going to, you know, evaporate, and that there isn't some part of it that is due to discrimination. And to the extent that it is due to discrimination, it's wrong, it's bad, and our civil rights law should be enforced to stop it.
Sir?
Yes, sir. I'm Glenn Freeman from Nebraska, originally from Washington, D.C. And we keep talking about progress and change. I just want to make this very short. Like I said, I left here and joined the Air Force. My mother used to clean up this building, and here I am. But I want to go back. I don't want you to understand that I'm insulted by what's going on here today. I am offended by it, and because you haven't said anything about what the problem is. The problem is, in the 21st century, is DNA. The mass majority of Americans, white Americans, fundamentally believe that blacks are genetically inferior. If you want to know why you make less money as a PhD, you make it because black PhDs is not as smart as white PhDs. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I'm truly, truly, and I'm going to be short, but I want you to understand that we sit here, keep talking about the symptoms, and we never talk about what the problem. The problem is very simple, and we have not addressed it. And I want you to know that you have truly, truly insulted me here. Maybe
Sir, do you
no
have a
one
question?
else. But let me finish, please.
you
When
have
you
a
talk
question,
about
sir?
poker chips, the poker chips were paid by 600,000 lives lost during the Civil War. You're talking about buying the tickets. We yet have not bought a ticket because we do not understand, again, that we are looked upon as being genetically inferior.
Can I respond, sir?
Well, I don't agree with that. I don't think that Americans are.
Well, I guess I felt compelled to respond. I guess some of the tone and some of the assumptions today reflect some of the things that I'm trying to get away from. To say that all blacks are X and all whites are Y, I think that you're starting out from a flawed proposition. We can't make such assumptions about each other merely because of the other person's race. I mean, if you do that, you crowd out any opportunity for, conversations, understandings, discussions. Are there whites who believe that blacks are inferior? The answer is yes. Are there blacks who are racist? The answer is yes. Do we have a history, a scarred history here in this country because of the oppression of blacks by whites? Yes. But at the end of the day, we have to maintain our humanity by respecting the humanity of others. And I think that we start out, we accomplish that goal by not assuming the worst and our fellow Americans based on their race.
It's my fault, but please keep your questions and make them questions very brief. We have a full agenda today. It's disrespect to the remaining members of the audience and also to the panelists. One observation, it seems as if, as I indicated before, we're going to go beyond the traditional narrative with respect to civil rights, but it occurs to me that we've been talking predominantly about a black-white paradigm, which is what we've been talking about for the last 50 years in terms of the civil rights movement. Just an observation. Yes, sir.